Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us in this webinar entitled Social Innovation Talks, Living in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. For those of you who were not with us last week, please join me in welcoming our speaker for today. He is an industrial designer and solutions architect at Accelerating Makers. He is a huge fan of using traditional and digital methods to turn ideas into real products. He believes that great ideas can come from anywhere, and digital fabrication technologies make it possible for anyone to design and create. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Sir Gideon Catalan.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Pat. All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you for having me here. Again, my name is Gideon, or you can call me Gids even for this presentation. And I'm an industrial designer, and I work with Accelerating Makers. And today, the topic that we want to be presenting to everyone is about Industry 4.0, smart cities and emerging technologies. So for this particular session, for the HIFI session, we're going to be discussing the fourth industrial revolution, and as the name says on the title, and that we are living in it. So it's a very exciting time to be alive, and it's a good way for us to sort of appreciate exactly where we are and how we got here. So throughout this presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. Okay. So the objectives today, what we'll be discussing first is the history and introduction of the fourth industrial revolution. We're going to talk about how it came about and what changes came about, and also what are the benefits of this revolution. We'll also go a bit about what is exactly an industrial revolution, because as the name implies, fourth means that there must have been predecessors. We'll cover that too. In the next part of the presentation, we'll also be discussing smart technologies, and we'll have a small hint about smart cities. Okay. So by the end of this webinar, the goal is that we should be able to understand what exactly is Industry 4.0. What is this technological revolution that we are living in, that we're experiencing every day? What are the differences between previous industrial revolutions? And what are some of the challenges as well as benefits that have come about because of this new revolution? So first thing I want to ask, and actually I want to jump off one of the interesting responses we got, where robots taking over the world. When you imagine what you're doing now, and we think of robots, pop media, you've got memes, you've got everything, it's everywhere, especially now. So the question I want to present is, how long do you feel like before robots become superior, before you become obsolete? And it's an idea that gets tossed around a lot. Maybe in a serious manner at first, maybe now it's more of a joke because people have come to realize more and more about technology. But the concept is still there, and the question still poses that technology is advancing very rapidly. And a lot of what we do, a lot of how our life is, has changed dramatically because of these changes, because of robots in some way. You can look back at life 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and it would have been vastly different to what we experience now. And these changes come about because of these changes, these revolutions in the way the world is structured. And because of these new technologies, because of these new developments, because of these new inventions, there are these dramatic changes. Now, we think of robots now, and we think of them as, cute interactive things. We've become so comfortable with the idea of robotics and robots that I'm sure we know, maybe like pop science fiction, maybe a couple years ago would have told you that robots taking over the world, or attack of the rogue AI kind of plots. But it's funny to see that that may have been the case a couple of years ago. But now, I mean, honestly, when you think of robots, most people aren't scared. Most people have an idea of what robots are. And for some, because many of the students, especially maybe for Benilde, have even interacted with the robotics. You may be in engineering, you may be in computer science, you may be in a bunch of other degrees or courses or even professions that interact with concepts of robotics. And so for many of us today, robotics has become more accepted, more commonplace. And there are less fears that need to be dispelled about robotics. And as we come to, interact more with the world outside, meaning work that's more industrial in the manufacturing setting, product development, many fields, we'll see that robotics has actually become very commonplace. And it's cool to appreciate. And for us to really, understand the depth of how much the world has changed and how integrated robotics are, we want to go back and we want to understand what is the history of robotics and how did it come about and how did it become so proliferated in our world, even though we don't know it, how it's so invisible. So one thing I want to introduce is that robotics is also kind of similar and tied to the concept of automation. So automation is a process of making something automatic, a process that is automatic. And automation was first devised and was developed alongside the concept of robotics. So automation is the idea of, in a nutshell, using big machines to do repetitive work. And for many people, we think of automation as something like this in this animation. A bunch of robots doing repetitive tasks that come together, build something. And they do this day in, day out, 100 million times over and over again with no changes and deviations. So you might think of like big, dumb robots. But for many who are aware of it, and what we're going to learn today is that robots and automation are actually quite advanced. And we've dispelled that notion over the years of like robots being just dumb because we've seen the power of robots today. We've seen robotics do surgery. We've seen robotics perform complex maneuvers like landing planes. And in the more invisible sense, we've seen robotics in products. We've seen how they can manufacture at a massive scale. We've seen robotics go into farming, agriculture. We've seen robotics even come into play in art with some robotic pieces. We've seen robotics come into play in entertainment. I don't know if you've seen, but there are some, a certain big multi-movie franchise is actually using robotics to create animatronics for stunt shows to replace human stunt doubles. So there are a lot of ways that robotics are showing their skill and that they're changing the perception that they're just big dumb robots. No, many people nowadays would understand that robotics is quite complex, quite important, and in a way quite beautiful. But robotics and this concept of automation, this concept of integrating these tools and machines have been around us for decades. And the ones we see today, where it comes out, maybe your Roomba or a AI-powered floor cleaning unit, or maybe a robot that can take your order at a restaurant. Those are probably like front-end examples of what have come out. But in the invisible side, maybe manufacturing, maybe in the industrial setting, robotics as well as automation has been around us for decades. And they've taken many shapes and forms. And for us consumers who aren't usually involved in these processes, it's usually an invisible thing. So it's interesting to note that while we may think that robotics is something that, it's developing, it's coming about, there might be robots walking in the streets in the future, but not anytime soon, is that robotics has been playing a role for a very long time in certain industries. So it's good for us to see that in that perspective that just because you don't see the technology in front of you, just because you don't learn about it every day because of where you interact, it doesn't mean that robotics isn't there. And I would say that today, this very moment, robotics has probably interacted with you or made your life easier, more difficult, something. It's interacted with you in almost every single aspect of your life, whether it's from healthcare, whether it's the products you consume, whether it's your food, even the clothing that you wear, maybe even the technology around us, very obviously. But robotics is something that has sort of penetrated all sorts of industries around the world. And so it's been around here for decades. Now, our topic today is focusing around the fourth industrial revolution. And this has many implications. First and foremost, there are 4 industrial revolutions that have happened so far. And we can go over them really quickly, but just to remember that this is sort of like an outline of these 4 revolutions. And it's really cool to see because we're going to take the time to sort of understand and immerse ourselves in each of these stages and go through time and experience these changes in the industry together. And so as we go through this, sort of like a historical trip back in time, I want you to just try to immerse yourselves. Imagine your life in these time periods and feel these changes and how they would affect you. And conversely, imagine how those changes have come about to you today. So we'll talk about changes that were hundreds of years ago, but you can see some of the effects today. So some ways that we can frame this sort of time skip back. All right. So the first era that we're going to go is first to the farming age. So 11,000 BC, and for a majority of human development, we were farming because, of course, we need food. And as a social creature, farming became the natural response to groups of people living together. So farming was always a natural response to this social aspect of humans. And farming was done primarily manually, meaning through tools, using physical labor, using human labor. And for a majority of our time, farming was one of the great limitations for human expansion. And we know this because you can track the development of human population very closely with the innovation of agriculture. So let's go 11,000 BC, let's say in this time period, humans could farm, but only using very primitive tools, using primitive methods, and using just the basic materials that they had around us. And one of the things that did was it limited the amount of food that a single person can generate. And at times, a human could gather food, and we were called hunter gatherers, maybe for one or two people. And you could build a community, maybe a family of humans living together, but there would always be a sort of a limitation. You always needed more space to forage, more space to hunt. And there were things such as food storage, cyclical foods, nutritional benefits, things that weren't an issue, that weren't problems that weren't solved back then because of the limitation of technology. And because of the way we farmed before we had technology, before we had tools, we were limited to very specific kinds of lifestyles, meaning we needed close access to agriculture. We couldn't develop far away from where we got our food. We couldn't develop societies that were distant from this concept. And because a majority of our work, our time was spent farming, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to pursue other academic thoughts. Schooling and higher education was difficult because a majority of a person's time needed to be dedicated to farming. And those few people who were accumulated power through wealth, who didn't have to do the farming themselves, only they could become academics. Only they could learn and study and research. Maybe this could have been religious. They could have become religious leaders. They could have become inventors. They could have become great thinkers. But the general idea was that because of the limitations of farming, most of our time of the average person was dedicated to supporting farming, which meant that a select group, a select few who would sometimes become the elite, were only the ones able to have the privilege of studying higher concepts, of becoming more learned, becoming more, advancing their thought. So that was the case before. And this also limited a lot in terms of human development. As you might imagine, health was very difficult. The average lifespan of the human was very short. Access to resources was scarce and was always an issue. There would be wars that were fought, whether on a large scale or on a small scale, for food and resources. Only the very wealthy and the very powerful, the elite, maybe it could have been like kings or queens, it could have been nobles in some extent in some periods, but essentially there was always an elite group that formed who were superior to those who were required to farm. And because of these limitations, because we always needed food, but farming itself was so difficult, it really created this divide. It really created a big issue in terms of society stratification, in terms of what we could do with our time. And so there was a lot of problems that stemmed from such a basic concept such as food and nutrition. And farming had that limitation because we were using manual labor, manual tools. Even as we started to introduce domestic concepts such as farming animals or domesticating animals for produce, there were still limitations. We still needed farmers. We still needed people to do that farming process. There was still the need for large areas of land to be run and harvested and grown by people. And this still kind of kept that problem. And it was really a big bottleneck in terms of how humans could develop. Okay. So now, obviously, the life we live in today is very different. That is not as much as a problem as it was before. So in 1760, there was a development of steam. And steam technology in particular, and this is different, let's say, from domesticating animals, the development of more advanced farming techniques. What steam did in particular was it created a new form of power. it was no longer an organic power, meaning this wasn't power that you generated and you would get tired or get sick eventually. It wasn't power generated by an animal that you constantly had to feed, that you had to domesticate, and at the same time could get sick or get tired easily. Steam was a source of power that humans could leverage that was industrial in scale, that was not an organic source. And steam represented the first industrial revolution because it revolutionized what people can do in terms of power. It created the ability to farm at larger scales. It created the ability to transport people, goods, livestock, whatever it is, across large distances using this technology. Steam allowed us to implement new forms of manufacturing because we had more leverage strength. We could now do heavy processing of metals. We could now make larger, more consistent production methods. There were so many changes brought about by the harnessing of steam power. And primarily, you could chalk that off to um, more industrial machines. So with steam, we were able to develop the beginnings of technology and industrialization. And what this transformed was, rather than having farming, which was required for many people to do to support a population, now one person using the power of steam, using the power of technology, using mechanization, could now leverage the power of 5 people. Meaning, instead of 5 people working on an acre of field, it could be one person with a steam machine. Instead of requiring 5 people or animals even to transport food or materials or resources across this distance, one person can run it using a steam engine. And this ability to multiply a person's strength to give us access to new forms of power is what really started the term of industrialization. We created industries where we can actually create larger scale production. And this meant that we can produce at a scale that was for larger groups of people. So first and foremost, because you can produce more food, because you can produce more clothing, more goods, whatever it is, more people can benefit from it, meaning more people had access to these technologies. And when more people have access to basic things like food, clothing, you end up with people who have more ability, more time to devote. And because there are more people available, because there doesn't have to be everyone farming, now you have more people who can study and pursue academics, which meant that you could further more development. And so the invention of steam and the power of industrialization revolutionized a lot about how people spend their time. Okay, an average person didn't have to work in the field day in, day out for them to support their family, for them to support themselves and their community. Instead, a person can spend, or maybe one person can spend their time farming, and the others were free to explore other things, other developments, other industries, other topics. And this ability for people to do more things with their time because of the power of steam opened up a lot of new inventions, opened up a lot of development. So if you notice, steam, which is from 1760 to 1840, that's roughly 80 years, okay? And if you compare that to the previous period, which is 11,000 BC, all the way to 1760, you'll see that such a huge time frame, and then suddenly the next time frame is so small. And the reason that the next time frame was actually much shorter is because steam, again, since more people could have time to pursue higher things, to invent, to use technology, to make things, to support technology, it was actually even faster to encourage development. And so it's kind of like an acceleration of development in some way. And steam power was the first revolution. Okay, we were able to harness another form of energy beyond just organic or human or animal labor. So what changed next? After steam was harnessed, we began to formulate new technologies. We began to invent new processes. One of which came about was the ability to process things such as petroleum or natural oil, and we began to be able to refine it using these technologies. We began to develop machines that can do refining. Either it was more accurate, or using steam manufacturing, we were able to produce harder, stronger parts. And what resulted was we had the ability to now process natural oil into new forms of energy, such as gasoline. In addition, we were also inventing and exploring a new and budding form of technology of energy called electricity. And when electricity and gasoline came into play, Steam, which was good at leveraging the power of human labor, was now obsolete because steam and electricity and gasoline can do this many times better, many times more efficiently, with smaller mechanisms, with more compact and safer technologies, without using tremendous amounts of heat generated by fire and coal. And so these new forms, alternate forms of energy, also allowed us to generate alternate forms of technology. And again, electricity and gasoline, that's something that supports our technology even today. So when electricity and gasoline came about, technology itself transformed. Instead of having to revolve around the limitations of steam, meaning pressurized systems, meaning you needed coal burners to boil water and produce the steam, you now have access to new forms of technology, such as electrical systems, the combustion engine. So these new developments spurred a new level of technology for people to use. And what happened was, alongside these technologies was also the development of the mass production line, which is kind of what you see in this animation here. So you introduce these new forms of technology. You have electricity, which is technology that you can transfer via wire, and eventually they developed ways to make it smaller and more compact. You had gasoline, which was a liquid form of energy which you could use and process and utilize in a more compact, safer system that isn't as dangerous as steam power. It was also more efficient than steam power in terms of storage, in terms of how you could use between its weight to energy ratio. It was in many times ways better. And as electricity and gasoline began to develop, so did the process of manufacturing. They began to see that, okay, with these new technologies, because we can make electricity, we can make the mechanism smaller. Because of gasoline, energy can become more efficient. So we don't need huge lumbering machines, but we can have small machines with the same amount of power. They soon began to develop what we call the manufacturing line or mass production. Okay, and mass production in and of itself is a big contributor to Industry 2.0 because with mass production in play, remember we prefaced this discussion with limited resources and scarcity, meaning not everyone had access to basic things like food, clothing, or education, or developing oneself other than survival. But because now it was easier to produce more things, meaning you could, instead of going from someone making, let's see, say like one electric fan per day, they could make 20 electric fans. So what happened was, instead of one person benefiting from this technology at the time, now 20 people can benefit from it. This meant that technology was now more accessible to more people. So this ability for more people to access and benefit from technology had many profound effects. One of the most important one was the quality of life. Conveniences that previously were only accessible to the wealthy, like new technologies, novel automobiles, now could be accessed by almost anyone. Um, Things like consistent lighting or heating for their homes through electricity and gas was now something that an average person can benefit from and became a basic right. Even the concept of having food every day, 3 times a day, was now no longer a luxury, but it was now something that could be considered a staple and a right for anyone in the world. Things that used to be scarce and were reserved for the very wealthy or the very elite, and this could include things as food, this could include shelter, clothing, even education, have now been made accessible to the masses, to the average person, because of the ability for us to produce more, because of the ability for us to have more time or use our time more efficiently, because of our ability to leverage not just our own strength, but the strength of technology to produce more intricate, more efficient forms of machinery. And this revolutionized a lot of concepts. Remember I mentioned time frame. Now, in this Industry 2.0, it's from 1890 to 1960, which is 70 years. So we've gone from, 11,000 BC. So that's at least 11,000 and 1,760 years for pre-farming to 90 years for the first industrial revolution, now down to 70 years for the second industrial revolution. And you see that it's almost exponential, the growth of how fast new technologies are coming up. And that is in no part in no small part due to how the technology develops. Okay, think 100, no, let's say 1,000 years ago, in a community of 20, 18 people had to constantly be farming day in, day out for you to feed everyone. You would also have to constantly be on the lookout for predators, be it natural predators or other humans who might need your resources. You would also constantly have to be on the lookout for health because there was no, healthcare system. People would constantly get sick or would die. So your population had to constantly replenish, which meant that you also needed people. So you needed to people to develop, you needed to train them, and all of these different needs made a person's time very limited. So you can imagine that when you have so many things to worry about, worrying about what to eat today, worrying about how not to die from disease, worrying about how to protect yourself from natural environment, it leaves you no time to think about things like world peace, things like literary novels, things like social constructs and concepts. You don't have the time for that. But as these industrial revolutions happened, people began to have more time because maybe one person can do more amount of work. Food was less scarce. There was now more comfortable homes with lighting, with heating, with more better forms of protection from the outside world. Now, people had more time to pursue these things, pursue academics, pursue social sciences, pursue a lot of different things that weren't possible. You increase this to Industry 2.0, where now people are producing at a scale that rather than focusing on the basic necessities, rather than being on a what you need basis, you could now make at the level where, hey, instead of just, getting what I need, I can actually now get what I want. You get me? It's no longer a question of I need this food to survive and I need these clothing to keep me warm and I need this lighting to keep me safe. But now I have the luxury of choosing. There's a plethora of food and I could choose what I want to eat, what's healthy, what's not. There's a plethora of options from, let's say, the kind of cookware I use, the utensils, the clothes I buy. I can have an automobile or I can have these things. But the thing is, you now have choices. It's no longer based on people's needs. And now you're exploring and catering to people's wants. And mass production kind of opened up that new and exciting realm of products. The exciting realm where it's no longer about what you need. It's no longer about basically surviving. But now, because of mass production, because of electricity, because of gasoline, because of Industry 2.0, in a nutshell, you now can explore a life that's comfortable, that's in some ways impractical, in some ways entertaining. Things that were a luxury before for the very, very elite or the very wealthy or maybe just the lucky are now available to the everyday person, to the masses. And this was such a novel concept. And it's very important to understand that this was revolutionary because it's kind of what transformed the way humans develop and we live today. And when you live now, not to say that there are no shortages, not to say that there are no issues, but the kind of issues that we have today are vastly different from the ones that humans had 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And it's that idea that because of these technological revolutions, that's so dramatically changed our lives that we don't even realize it. And that's why it's so key to see how industrial revolutions did change our lives and affect it. Okay. So these changes, all right, people now have more time, people now have access to mass production, they have access to technology, have now created this new realm of, being able to make products and things you want. Okay. I think the budding eras of product design, consumerism, mass production, they were starting to come about, especially around, past the 1900s, definitely was there. So life was already changed. And then we came about a new invention. Okay. Around 1969 was the introduction of the concept of the computer or the computing machine. And this is important to introduce because before, machinery was operated by hand. A human got a tool and would operate it. It would do what we wanted to do because we were doing it, right? It had no mind of its own. It had no brain. It was not, smart. It could not decide, it could not move on its own. Humans had to do it. And a lot of the technologies, even the way we manufacture things, were similar. Yes, we were using electricity. Yes, we were using steam powered and gasoline to power the engines, to create hydraulics for these arms and cranes, to use a tractor that can lift tons of material. But in the end, humans were still operating it. Humans were still controlling it. So humans were in some way or form a limitation because you needed a skilled person to operate a lathe. You needed a skilled person to plow a field, a farmer with experience. You needed a skilled tailor who knows how to operate a sewing machine to sew clothes. Um, you needed human brain and human skill that had to be developed and was very niche and specific for you to do a lot of operations. That isn't to say that it's bad, okay? I'm not trying to put a value on it, like an inherent value on whether it was good or bad. But humans had the necessity of skill to do a lot of things. Okay, so before technology, for example, before you had a calculator, you would need to learn how to do math, to do some adding and subtracting. So if you wanted to learn any accounting, or let's say you wanted to become a business person or someone who dealt with money or large amounts of business, you would need to study mathematics. You would need to study these concepts for you to even understand how to do it. Okay, and this became a sort of a limitation, meaning that people who didn't have the right education to learn how to operate a car could not go places. If you didn't have the knowledge on how to read, you wouldn't be able to use a library and you wouldn't be able to access technology there. If you didn't know how to operate a tractor or maybe an agricultural machine, then you wouldn't be able to farm. You would need someone who had that skill. And with the introduction of computers, what it did was computers can now copy the skills that people put into it. Okay, so that was kind of what they did. A skilled person, for example, in this case, an engineer or a mathematician, could program a computer to do the calculations for them. And let's not get the idea that the computer now is smarter than the person. No, because the skill of the person has to go into the computer. The person has to program it, the person has to design the computer, they have to write the program, and they have to execute it and make it work. So it still has people as the core thing. But the idea was this: computers now can take that information, that knowledge, and can now leverage it for new purposes. So what that meant was a skilled person can design or invent a calculator. And now anyone who is not, who doesn't have access to a lot of mathematics skills or, time to compute it, can now get the square root of 1,235, which might not be a perfect square. So they can get whatever the square root of that is. And what happened was computers are now able to do a majority of the computation, which meant that these computers can now leverage people's skill. That's the word how I like to define it. Computers leverage people's skill to be able to, for more people to use that skill, like for example, calculators, more people can do complex math. Or computers can now enable you to do new things. For example, if a computer can help you calculate, let's see, what's something a computer can do? Oh, okay. If a computer can help you calculate how much mass is inside an object based on weight, then you know how much you need to pour. Computers can also be used, let's say, to perform tasks, which is something that we're going to introduce with optimization. A computer now can do for you how to very minutely put small chips inside a piece of electronics instead of a person having to memorize and learn that themselves. So these computers now had the skill to do certain things. Okay, and this is a change that came about in Industry 3.0. Computers leveraging human skills. Okay, so computers were now present in calculators. They were present in Word documents. They were present in business calculations. They were present in healthcare, in data, in so many things, because all of these things had in common that they required thinking. They required complex thinking. and a computer can do that thinking for them. It can assist a person in doing that kind of thinking. Okay, and so going back, Industry 1.0 and 2.0, I could describe it as machines leveraging physical ability, right? Steam, electricity, gasoline. Those are physical ability. Industry 3.0 introduced computers leveraging mental or skill. Okay, that's usually how I do Industry 2.0 to Industry 3.0. And so with the introduction of computers, everything changed. Okay, you didn't anymore have to have the skill of 30 years in an industry to do something. Meaning, if you wanted to manufacture injection mold a metal mold, you didn't anymore need to have the skill of CNC machining for 20 years to manufacture the perfect mold. Instead, a computer can manufacture that mold for you with the same amount of accuracy, with the same amount of skill, because a skilled person helped program it, because they used their knowledge and put it into the computer. And so what happened was computers made it so that a person's skill can now be more efficiently leveraged. So one skilled person can use computers to operate and manufacture hundreds of thousands of things, rather than that person's skill being limited to one machine. It's a bit of a big jump, because it really is. Computers really, for me, were the biggest stage. But the key thing to remember here is that computers help leverage human mental skill. Okay, now let's take into more concrete terms. What do we use computers for every day? First one, let's say, is a display. All right. If we try looking at it from a traditional perspective, if you wanted to display an image, right, you would need to paint it or draw it or illustrate it by hand, which meant, if you're not good at drawing, it may not look so good. Let's say you wanted to draw a person's face. You may draw it a bit differently. It may look a bit different, may not look so nice. Maybe it may look good. But the point is, it depends on your skill. And if you wanted to communicate a person's face to another person, me drawing a face and showing it to you and asking you to copy it and show it to another person, the face will probably change a lot. Okay, so if you've ever played the game telephone, right, where you say something, pass it to someone, and they pass it to someone until the message changes dramatically. It's kind of like the same concept. Because it depends on a person's individual skill, a person's individual ability, which can be inconsistent depending on person. Actually, it's definitely not the same across different people. Then the concept of conveying ideas, the concept of that skill also changes dramatically. It's more contextual. But what computers did now is, instead of having to draw a picture of a person, a computer can illustrate it digitally, meaning it uses a precise set of pixels to show you that face. For example, my face. A computer is doing that for you. The camera sees the light from that's coming off of me, interprets it as a digital image. The computer reads the image and interprets it as something that we can see. You can see my face. And a computer does this consistently and repeatably and immediately, which is something that, for example, humans would have very difficult time doing. And immediately you can see that this ability of the computer to even just see the camera and display it back to you is an example of a computer leveraging human skill. If a human had to do that role, if I told you, okay, your job is to show my face to someone across the world. You can use a telescope, you can use a super long fiber optic cable to see my face, but you still have to draw it, and you have to be able to illustrate it to that person exactly. You'll know that it's very difficult and it's very dependent. So in that way, computers were able to create this new level of a threshold of skill and consistency that humans would never be able to achieve. And this is where it starts to get the notion where people were like, okay, so are robots superior to humans? Are we inferior by design? Are they going to take over what we're doing? I'll stop you right there as early as Industry 3.0 and say that no, because humans still have to develop these computers. Humans still have to write the programs. So we still need skilled people to actually teach the machines and tell them what to do. So that was Industry 3.0, where humans can leverage their skill thanks to computers. Okay, so computers came about, and one of the things that happened during this process, during this evolution from 1969 to the present, is you have computers that leverage mental skill. You have machines that leverage physical skill. So it's only natural. What happens when we combine the two? What we introduced, what came about as computers became more advanced, became more prolific, was that we started using computers to operate machines. And when you combine, imagine this, a skilled computer with advanced skill and a machine with advanced power, physical capabilities, you created things like trains that can be operated by a computer, automatically starts and stops an electric motor, and can transport hundreds of thousands of people a day. You create personal computers that can do complex computations. They can show you graphics and images and transmit data through however it is in real time, all in an individual scale. You have cell phones, which are so small and compact thanks to micro machining, and have a powerful processor or computer inside that can make them do everything from calculations to chatting with people to doing webinars on the internet. And when we started to leverage those two together, computers for skill and electronics or mechanical things for physical power, it accelerated how we develop programs, and it was crazy. It is crazy even today. There's crazy inventions coming up all the time, and you see how powerful that is. And what it did was the changes that happened from the first industrial revolution, right? People had more access to basic needs. We could manufacture more. We were able to grow populations larger. The second industrial revolution, which meant people had more efficient forms of energy, electricity and gasoline. We had smaller machines, safer machines. And then the third industrial revolution now, which had computers, which meant that skill, human skill, was no longer a scarcity, but can now be leveraged across many people. It really accelerated how development happens. And that's why even today we're living in it, and we're kind of moving to this new stage. So the question now becomes, combine those two. We have machines with computers that operate machines that are making more machines. We have people who are learning these new concepts because now we have so much time. We'll go back to this concept now of time. So I was saying 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you would barely have any time because you were too busy surviving. Now, in this present day, I would ask you, how much time do you need to spend foraging for food? How much time do you need to spend making sure you're not cold at night, or that you have electricity? For some, this is still a problem. And the point is not to sort of like pretend that the problem is gone. But what's happened is more people have access to these basic needs. More people are able to enjoy luxuries such as food that they don't have to think about on an everyday basis. More people are able to think about higher things such as education, learning higher concepts that require you to dedicate time and mental effort. We can now explore things such as higher sciences. Things that were impossible to do before because you didn't have the time, because you didn't have the resources, are now possible today thanks to these innovations, thanks to these industrial revolutions. And that's one of the key things that I want us to understand and appreciate when we think of life today. Even the ability to be aware of these inventions, even to be aware of this ability to, have the luxury of time, was made possible because we have the time to realize it. It's kind of like a circular thing. That's why this sort of industrial revolution, for many, is invisible. But when you realize how profoundly it affected and changed humanity's development to what we have now, you'll see that these technologies are so key to why life is like it is today. And grounding it again, it was not perfect, nor it is perfect today. There are still a lot of inequalities, there are still lots of inefficiencies, pollution is still a problem. But you see here that because of these industrial revolutions, people are able to do more. That's why I liked a lot of the responses we had for the icebreakers, such as modernization, because one of the things that was mentioned was that thanks to these things like modernization, more people are able to do things, more people have access to basic needs, more people have the ability to benefit from technology. And that's one of the things that we should remember, that it's because humans have developed these technologies that we have the ability to have the lives we have today. The luxury of time, the luxury of being able to pursue things that are beyond basic survival, to go beyond just living on a day-to-day basis. Those are all possible because of these innovations, because of these technologies. And even certain concepts such as inequality, such as social stratification, they exist still today, but they were vastly different. And in some ways, I would say even more dramatic before these innovations were there. So a lot of key concepts that we deal with today, both social, environmental, and on an economic aspect, have been impacted profoundly by these inventions. And when you understand this, that's why we call them revolutions, because they weren't just for manufacturing. Steam didn't just affect, transport. It didn't just affect trains. Computers didn't just affect technology or IT business. It's so profound in all forms of human development. That's why they have the term industrial revolution. And because it's so profound, because it's so big, it's always natural that, it's like sleeping on a giant turtle. You may not notice or realize it's there. Um, and that's why it's cool for us to take this moment to sort of open our eyes and realize how profound the industry has changed with 1, 2, and 3. And it's actually really interesting. And we can learn a lot by going back and kind of studying those changes in many ways, social aspect or, yeah, but that's a tangent. But there. So Industrial Revolution really changed how many things operate. Now, okay, we have this huge long preface, the history of how Industrial Revolution came about. So the big question we have now, okay, we know that 1, 2, and 3 changed lives so much. Even today, it's not fully understood, or there's still a lot of things changing. So now you're introducing Industry 4.0. What is Industry 4.0? So Industry 4.0, we're trying to take these past innovations, right, and introduce the concept where computers are not only, which calls again, operating based on what humans have set for them, but we're creating a system in which computers can actually grow and learn and actually do things beyond their original operation. Meaning, in Industry 4.0, we leverage something called the internet. And this internet, this ability to interconnect separate things, okay, allows us to change the concept of computers as an offline individual unit. But now think of computers, think of technology as a small discrete member of a whole system. So Industry 4.0 can be defined as such. If Industry 1.0 was steam, Industry 2.0 was electricity and gasoline, 3.0 was computers, Industry 4.0, I say one of the big driving forces of this is the internet. And what the internet brought alongside with it was a concept of a network, a concept that machines and computers, they're advanced, they can do many things, but they were offline, they were limited to themselves. With the introduction of the internet, you now have the concept of a computer that can communicate with other computers, meaning the skills, the information, the ability of those computers can now be linked and added to each other, and introduce the concept of machinery, manufacturing, agriculture, social, society, whatever it is, on a global network that is omnipresent, that is real time, and everywhere around the world, even outside the world. And that's what Industry 4.0 is. Leveraging the use of the internet, of interconnected systems, be it IoT, Internet of Things, being it data processing, being new technologies, being AI-powered things, whatever it is, using these interconnected network systems, we are now creating and generating a new form of industry, a more dynamic, a more reactive industry. And because it's so new, there's no way to fully define what Industry 4.0 is because we are living in it today and we don't know. Every single day, you can check the headlines. There are some new inventions coming out, whether it's a cloud powered shopping service, whether it's using robots that use cloud computing to walk and move like a human, whether it's AI generated faces that can mimic a real person but is actually completely artificial. Because of how fast the technology is changing, Industry 4.0 doesn't have a very strict scope and boundary in terms of what it is because we're living in it. It's real. It's today. Tomorrow will be Industry 4.0 and we don't know what's in there. But the idea is we look at all of these industrial changes, this Industry 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and we see how profoundly the world changed. We saw how much better, in many ways, life became for the average person. We saw how many advantages these modern techniques had in terms of healthcare, in terms of agriculture, and society. And now, cyber physical systems, IoTs, the internet networks, changed are changing the way it operates because these systems are now not limited to physical spaces. Okay, instead of being limited to a physical computing machine, a physical tool, a physical machine, the internet has created a new network of cyberspace where things can interact. Okay. We'll slow down a bit because I only start talking about cyberspace and these new this like new concept. It's hard to grasp. Okay, so to introduce and properly understand and grasp the concept of this new cyber physical spaces is like this. Industry 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 all occurred in a physical space, meaning someone had to physically make a computer, you had to physically operate the machine, and you could benefit physically from the results. Meaning someone had to make it physically, someone had to ship it to you physically, and the only way you could appreciate it was physically receiving it. And so this connection to being physical had so many limitations. Of course, transport, pollution, time. It took time to get to you. It's not instantaneous. A lot. The fact that it's physical was a huge property of all of these revolutions. And what it did was imagine the entire revolution of the world, right? Everything we discussed was all in a physical space. Okay, it was happening in real life in the world. And with the introduction of the internet, it created this new concept of a cyberspace. And it can be dizzying to imagine, but all of the innovations that happened in a physical space, all of the limitations of physical things, like having to physically connect a computer to the electricity, having to physically operate the machine, physically interact with something, physically monitor data, like you have to see if your blender is working, if your food is burning on the stove. Imagine a world, okay, where because of the internet, you didn't need to physically be there. You can exist anywhere digitally. You can interact with computers anywhere digitally. You can operate a machine in China in real time digitally. You can read a book in France. You can look at a painting in Italy. Anywhere in a digital space. And that's why the industrial 4.0 is going to be so big, is so big. And even now it's transforming. And we're only really getting a grasp of how big it's changing, as time goes by. Because this new cyber digital space that has yet to be fully explored, that is so wild and unknown and is developing every day, is happening. Computers, humans, are transcending a physical existence. We're no longer limited to a physical being. But thanks to the internet, thanks to your mobile phone, thanks to webinars like this, we now can exist and live in a digital space. So bear with me. That's kind of like how big Industry 4.0 is. This new digital space has yet to be explored. It's growing, it's expanding. Machines are being developed to fully explore it, be it VR, augmented reality. Someone mentioned Black Mirror. We have to face it. It's true in some way. Whether we like it or not, digital spaces exist. You have online communities, you have fake news, you have cyber campaigns, you have MMOs where people dedicate their lives to. People play video games all their life. You have online personalities, you have influencers who have this whole personality and persona online. They're real, aren't they? They may not be physically real, but as someone who's been living with digital technology, who lives on the internet, it's real enough. This webinar is a good example. 5 years ago, we'd have to attend this in person in Benilde. I would have had to physically go there. You'd have to commute to Benilde to go there. You would have spent time, physical effort to be there. But because of the development of this technology, we're here, we're talking, we're discussing this. And I'm real to an extent, but I'm not real because I'm only a digital projection of myself. It's hard to fully grasp this concept. And you're not alone. Even, as I said, living in an industrial revolution is breaking a lot of boundaries. It's shaping new things because that's how a revolution works. It shatters the existing system, I forget the word, but like the existing system, it breaks it and transforms something new. And that's why we call it a revolution. And yes, status quo, thank you. The status quo has been shattered because of this new digital space. So when we look at Industry 4.0, and as we consider how we're living in it, there are so many things. And what I'm going to discuss with you in the second part of this webinar, they're just small parts. We'll be discussing a lot about concepts on IoT. We'll be talking about how digital fabrication comes in. We'll talk about smart technology, like smart gadgets, smartphones. But don't forget, don't be deceived. Industry 4.0 is bigger than anything I can discuss with you today, even as a single person. So I want to, I think after this, we're going to take a really quick break. Let me just check. But the idea here is that I really want to introduce this concept because Industry 4.0 is a huge revolution. And there are so many implications of what it can bring us, what it can do, that all the other industrial changes seem to pale in comparison. And that's fair because we are living in that revolution. So what I want us to take away as we're doing this break is to reconsider that life is changing. You may feel it. You may be able to keep abreast today. You can keep up with the latest news, new technologies, but we have to accept that there are developments that are happening that we are part of, which is what I want to emphasize, that we are living in it, that we are part of. So we look at previous industrial revolutions and we see results. We see what happened and we can think, oh yeah, it was obvious that steam power would change things. It was obvious that when you introduce electricity, we'd make inventions. And it was obvious that computers, would become advanced. It's so obvious. But when you're living in it, we don't know. And it's an exciting way of seeing technology around us today. It's an exciting way of remembering that what we take for granted, that we live and breathe in the internet, and every day because of what we do. It's exciting to see that it's so new, it's so malleable, it's so unexplored territory. And there's so much that we can do with it. There's so much that we can shape. And putting things more groundedly, there are so many things that we have to do right. Okay? So don't forget, new unexplored territories, good things and bad things can happen. So yeah, but we won't get into that too much. Okay? So I think in order to contain this revelation, because even I kind of when we discuss this, I think it's a fair time if we would like to take a quick, let's see, show taskbar. Okay, yeah, it's around 5:11, so we can take a quick 5-minute break. If that's all right. And this 5-minute break, we're going to pause. Kind of gather our thoughts. You can gather some water, some refreshments, kind of mull it over. And when we get back, the next two things we'll discuss are drivers as well as principles of Industry 4.0, okay? So it's an easier way to break it down in a more product-oriented aspect. All right? So Pat, is it okay if you're there that we take a 5-minute break?
Yes, of course.
All right.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And before anything else, thank you to Sir Gideon for that mind blowing first part. I know some of you are still getting information overload, so let's take a few more seconds to let our minds catch up. And while we're on a break, let me take this moment to promote our upcoming events on November 10 as we talk about digital fabrication and fab labs. And lastly, on November 17 for emerging tech and smart cities. Both these events are with Sir Gideon as well. Anyway, back to our event. If you have any questions, you can go right ahead and send it in our chat box, and we'll address them later during our open forum. For a quick recap, we learned the introduction of Industrial Revolution and also its history, and the mind-blowing fourth Industrial Revolution. Okay, now let's go back to our talk. Again, don't be shy to send some questions to our chat box, and we'll address it later during our Q&A session. Without further ado, please welcome back Sir Gideon.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Sorry if I got here a bit late. Okay, well, I guess more time for us to recollect our thoughts. All right, before I continue, yeah, hopefully you guys stayed with me for that kind of like exposition. I get kind of into it when I talk about Industry 4.0 because it's kind of crazy. Nothing. Okay, so let's ground ourselves back down and let's try to tackle Industry 4.0 from a more technical perspective. Okay, so this will kind of like balance out my tirade a while ago. Okay, so we want to look at first some principles and drivers for Industry 4.0. So we want to understand, what are the principles about Industry 4.0 and how it works, so we can kind of like frame it. And then we want to look at the drivers or things that motivated or brought us towards these changes. Okay, so for the four principles, we can kind of define Industry 4.0 into these four things. First would be transparency, interconnectivity, decentralized, and assistance. So these principles play different roles, and you could define them in many ways. So let's do it first individually. So first thing, one of the principles of Industry 4.0 is interconnectivity. Based on my explosion a while ago, I said a lot about the internet, about the network, about connected things. And the reason why internet forms like a very centralized basis on Industry 4.0 and how it came about is because of this key concept. So with the internet, we have new things. And this isn't just the internet. This includes 5G or wireless signals. This includes telephone, communication, radar, GPS, all of those. What it all involves is an interconnected series of networks, right? And this interconnectivity allows us to connect many things, but key things that it connects are people, meaning be able to communicate, things. Things is a very general thing. So this is broken down into things like sensors that can read data. Another important thing, things that can do things like manufacture things, that can make things. Things that can produce light, produce heat, produce electricity, many things. But the interconnectivity plays a part because those things are now able to communicate with each other. And those things can communicate to people. You can get a notification on your phone that will tell you where your delivery is or if it's about to be delivered. You can get a thing like a plug that will tell you how much electricity you consume, and it will give you a notification when you've reached a certain point. You can get an update on the weather that will tell you what temperature it is or if it's going to rain. You can get all these things that communicate with each other, and that's why it forms the basis of Industry 4.0. So one of these concepts that will be introduced and talked about, excuse me, a lot when we talk about Industry 4.0 is the term IoT, or Internet of Things. And that's what I was kind of describing with this. An interconnected network or an internet of things, things that produce light, things that produce talk, that collect data. IoT is interconnectivity in a nutshell. And whenever you see this concept, the important thing to remember is the idea of IoT is that instead of having individual systems that work on their own in their solitude, in their individual tasks, you can now have many things that are working together. Meaning, if you're getting the temperature of a country, you can have sensors all over the world, all over the country or all over the cities, telling you what temperature it is. If you needed something to tell you about water pollution, you can have a bunch of things in the water that will tell you the condition of the water in all these specific places. And this connected network allows also communication between both monitoring and reporting. So that concept of communicating is very key. And it applies not just to technology, but to a lot of concepts we'll go on here. So interconnectivity, one of the very most important basic principles of Industry 4.0. Next is transparency. So transparency is important because what it's done is it allows data to be seen. So transparency, to see through, to see things, to see through things. And when you have this ability to communicate vast amounts of data anywhere, at any time, in real time, no matter where you're from, you create the ability to actually see through systems, see through things. Okay, that's easier to understand when you think of it in concrete terms. So one thing that you can try thinking of it as pollution monitoring. If I were to ask you, how do you know if Manila is polluted? How would you tell me that that statement is true? You would tell me it's true based on facts, based on data that you collected. And this data is, in a way, how you can see things. And what IoT does, and in connected networks, is that you can now collect data from everywhere. You can connect data from air sensors all over Manila. You can connect water pollution reports from water processing plants all over the city. You can collect biological data, maybe endangered species or movements of animals. You can also collect data on maybe health. Maybe there are more cases of respiratory illnesses here or there. This ability to collect this data is the ability to see things. And that's why transparency is a key part, because seeing things allows you to see data. And data and information is what is one of the main principles of how Industry 4.0 works. It's actually also part of the drivers, but the ability to see is the main principle. Because of IoT, because of these interconnected networks, because of all these things that can now collect data and report it, and because you're able to read it in real time, things are now more transparent. Okay? You can monitor where your delivery item is any time of the day. You could monitor if a food is out of stock. You can monitor your stocks of your businesses in real time. Transparency, the ability to see things, collect data. Next is decentralized. So in the Industrial Revolution, we mentioned before, one of the things we mentioned was like individual units, right? A machine in its solitude on its own. But when you introduce the concept of a network, you now connect these machines to other machines. And what this does is it decentralizes things in the sense that, imagine if you had easy information, a server that stores your family photos. In the previous, without the internet, your family photos would be stored in a physical space. This could be an album, this could be a photograph, or even a couple of years later, this could be a hard drive. But it's still physically somewhere. It's centralized in a single thing. What IoT does, Industry 4.0 does, is the ability to actually decentralize your information and put that information everywhere all at once. You can have it hosted in a Facebook server in Dubai. Part of it is hosted on a data farm from Amazon floating off the Pacific Ocean. Part of it might even be stored in Europe, maybe in some kind of data collection program, whatever it is. But your information is decentralized. It's no longer in one specific place. And this applies for many forms of data, many things. Your personal records, your financial statements, they're no longer limited to a physical paper. They're decentralized across computer servers. And this idea of decentralization has a lot of implications because it allows us to both access information easily, meaning more people have access to it. So it's easier to manipulate, meaning easier to access, easier to use for tasks. And it also removes the concept of it being tied to a single physical space. Well, transforming to a digital space. Okay, so that's decentralized. It's the idea that instead of being limited to a specific place, Your data, your information, your knowledge, whatever it is, can now be decentralized and stored in multiple places at the same time. Redundancies, safety, security, many implications, but too many, we'll go into it another time. So that's the other concept. Finally is assistance. So Industry 4.0, let's reflect back now to people. We've been talking so much about technology, about these concepts, and now let's go back and think, okay, what does it mean for us? What does all these huge things mean for people? So Industry 4.0 shifts the role of humans. No longer an operator of the machine, now they have become problem solvers and decision makers. What do we mean by that? Previously, you would need to operate your machine to do something. If you wanted to, okay, I guess the kind of cliche and easy way to describe this would be driving. Before, you would need to manually and drive your car. You would need to physically make sure how fast you're going, if you're in the right lane, if someone's going to hit you or if you're going to hit someone, you are operating the machine. But with Industry 4.0, for example, with the introduction of smart cars, it shifted humans from no longer simply just operators, but now to problem solvers and decision makers, in the sense that instead of having to decide what route, instead of having to decide the basic things like how fast you're going to go, how close to the curb you're going to drive, if you're going to mount a corner a bit too tightly or not, the computer will now do it for you. And instead, you can focus on things like, which route do I want to take? What do I want to do while I'm driving? Is there a meeting or some task I can do during this process? Humans are no longer required to operate and do basic things. Sort of, I use the word menial, but menial is a very loaded term. So basic operations, humans are no longer stuck in basic operations, but they can now elevate themselves to advanced advanced things like problem solving and decision making, essentially. So that's kind of what is the principle of Industry 4.0. Put it another way, data. Okay, humans would have to file paperwork. You'd have to have repositories of physical copies of things, your bank statements, passports, all that. It's all physical. But as we're transitioning into Industry 4.0, where everything's becoming digital, now your data and your information can be collected automatically. You have a QR code scan when you go to a business establishment. You no longer always have to fill out a health declaration form. You can do it in an app. Example of Industry 4.0. It's changing humans from doing basic operative tasks to more advanced tasks. And you know what concept rings true in this one? Time. Humans no longer need to spend time doing basic things and can now spend their time on more advanced things, which is the recurring theme, if you remember, of previous industrial revolutions. All comes around. So there, assistance. Robots, technology in general, assists humans to go from operators to problem solvers. Okay? And this isn't just we don't want to think of it also like a dumb task. Like just because humans aren't operating a machine doesn't mean they're dumb. No. What happens is because of, remember the previous point of data and transparency, humans now are able to see this data clearly and make decisions based on it. So going back to the car, you may not have to think smartly about driving, but now you can see data on traffic. You can see data on how full the parking is where you're going. You can see data if you're late for work. And you can now make problems based on that data. And like in many things, and I think it's a universal concept, making decisions based on data is more accurate and more effective in general. Okay, so one of the things we can consider as a property. All right, so we can go summarize that again. So these would be the four principles that kind of like guide everything about Industry 4.0. Now, we might want to see also what are some of the drivers, because when we were discussing 3.0, sometimes what I get the feeling was, okay, this is great. You know, we have all this technology, it's comfortable. Why did we need to move to this? Why did we need to move to this whole fancy new digitalization? And when you look at the drivers, you'll see kind of why. Now, we're going to take this, we're going to use this concept of a product supply chain. So product supply chain is the process when a product is made from, when you produce it, at the bottom, and all the way to when you sell it. And we'll use this as a central example. And it's also very applicable because if you're talking about product design, it's very relevant. So the idea is that in a supply chain, it goes in a sequence. Someone produces it, it goes to the supplier who sells it to a manufacturer who turns it into something like a product. And that product is moved to a distributor who brings it to, for example, a wholesaler who stores it, and the wholesaler puts it to a retailer who actually sells it to you. And this could be like the life cycle for many products, even like a cereal that you buy. Some of them may not always be there, or some may be merged together, but generally that supply chain exists for all products. And we call this the vertical supply chain. It's the vertical path that a product has to go through in its life cycle. And so what happened was with Industry 4.0, we can apply some of these principles, and it's actually changing how this operates. Okay, so before we see how it's changed, let's go back to Industry 4.0. In the context of a supply chain, we can see that, okay, first, for example, you can have location information. When you order something, it will tell you where your package is. Is it in the packet delivery hub? Is it with the rider itself? Is it in your front door? You can know that. And how do you know that? Because you have interconnectivity. You have an app that updates you real time through the internet. And the only way you're able to view that app is through a app. And that app was designed by someone. So that technical assistance, because someone developed a computer program that helps you understand and navigate the website to see that data. See? So even something as basic as shopping online can be transformed and has been transformed by Industry 4.0. So when you apply it to the supply chain, you actually drastically transform and change how it works. This example is very relevant because I'm sure everyone here has ordered something online. And you may have taken it for granted, or no. Let me take that back. If you had ordered something online maybe 5 years ago before the pandemic, you would have known that it was a very scary and sketchy thing to do. Online selling in the Philippines wasn't that stable. Online transactions, even less so. We were always taught never put your credit card details online, don't trust strangers on the internet. And it was very interesting. And if you remember when these shopping services started, there wasn't a lot of trust, right? People weren't sure whether it was safe. There was, only a few people started doing it. It wasn't like a standard thing to do online shopping. But when the pandemic started and kicked in really like full gear and quarantine and isolation was everywhere, people began to see the value of it and in some ways the necessity of a system. So we can see the vertical supply chain as a form of driver because when changes like that happen, and Industry 4.0 comes into the picture, it can radically transform the process. So what happened? Rather than the supply chain being a single, actually, I will turn on a light because I'm yellow right now. Okay. I am a bit yellow still. Okay, so rather than a supply chain being completely vertical, right? Meaning you had to go through the steps and let's say back then you wouldn't know where your package is, you'd only know when it's delivered, or you'd have to email or message the person you bought it from and they'll contact their supplier and they'll tell you, oh, your package is on a boat heading to the Philippines. What happened was because of Industry 4.0, because of the interconnected network, because of the decentralized system, you weren't limited to a person who was handling the logistics of your package. It transformed the supply chain and turned it into what we call vertical integration. It meant that the supply chain is no longer a single linear path. Okay, it's no longer a step of a solid chain. Thanks to interconnected networks, for example, here, a consumer can now browse the shop online. And the retailer can make adjustments if it's out of stock, if it's in stock in real time. They can give you discounts in real time. But that's nothing new, right? But they can tell you, oh, our manufacturer is out of stock, so we were low on stock. You can know that because of this access. And at the same time, a distributor, for example, the one who delivers or transports the goods, now have their own system where they can notify customers where their product is. Where is your package right now? And maybe through cloud computing, all of that is generating data. Let's say that online store says we've made 2 million new orders today. We've had 200 complaints. We've made 20 refunds. And all of that is valuable data for a business, right? And that's all possible because of cloud computing. And then all around it, and what we take for granted is, of course, robotic assistance. How? The app itself. Because of an app, it's easy and intuitive to navigate to buy a product. It's easy to put in your details, to send the purchase, to verify. It's easy for you to monitor. I want to see where my product is. It's easier for you to give feedback. Let's say I didn't like the product and I want to rate it low. It's even easier for you to get a refund because it's right there in the product, in the app. And all of that is forms of robotic assistance. So you can see here that online shopping is kind of one of the best ways to illustrate how a traditional vertical supply chain, which used to be very rigid and was very limited in terms of access, has now been shattered completely and transformed because of Industry 4.0. Okay, I can't speak for myself because maybe before 3 years ago, I had never ordered anything online. But I know that from the experience of, for example, my parents, that when they order things online before, it was a very time-consuming and risky process, or even like over the phone. You can only contact to a specific person. Oftentimes, your package can take a month, and it's difficult to get the status because you would still need to contact the logistics company, and they would route it through you. And oftentimes, it was considered a risk. You were gambling your money because you didn't know if the package would arrive or not. There was a lot of distrust in a system before. But because of this transparency principle, it's generated that trust because it's now transparent for you to see where is my package. It's transparent to see where are you based, where is your store based, where is your manufacturer located. It's transparent to get a refund. It's transparent to see previous customer feedback, how many stars or ratings it has. So it really changed how. And you see, even traditional things like grocery shopping. I think grocery shopping is something that hasn't yet fully taken on yet, especially online grocery shopping, because it's kind of inflexible. But even then, even though it's something that no one would have thought, oh, I would never buy, if you ask someone 3 years ago, would you ever buy groceries online? No, you'll be like, I need to pick out the products I want. Maybe they don't have what I like, or maybe they'll give me bad produce. But because of these technologies, grocery shopping is now a thing. Online delivery shopping, it's happening. And it may not be fully integrated. It may not be super effective yet, but it's happening and people are using it. And you see, even these old processes that were considered, very strict and formal and traditional are now forcing change because these changes are driving it to adapt Industry 4.0. And it's just online shopping. You could think of so many other things. Education, although I don't think it's as entertaining because education, let's not get into that, but education was forced to change a bit. Work from home now exists. Remote monitoring systems are now in place. Entertainment, the number of YouTube personalities or people who stream have grown so much, whether you're professional or casually streaming. But because of these new changes, because it's so easy to have a webcam for robotic assistants, it's so easy to set up an account to stream. It's so easy for people to access it because of the internet. Anyone can do it, and it's becoming more commonplace. These small changes that you may take for granted, that you may think are, that's just a fad, it's just a cultural change. But when you see that it's in reflection of Industry 4.0, it's like, it's amazing how many things are affected by this if you really just take the time to kind of like investigate and follow into it. So there. Now, one of the other things that this has done and is it also transformed the supply chain. So this is interesting. If you're ever involved with businesses, you may be familiar with this today. So remember I described to you the vertical supply chain. Traditionally, those steps would be done by specific businesses. Like let's say I was a wholesaler company or I was a retailer or I only do logistics. But what's happened is something called a new concept called horizontal integration. So what happened was, imagine you're a company that does, let's say, retailing and producing. You're a small town shop. And another person does wholesale and distributor. Perhaps they're a warehouse. And another one does processing only, manufacturing. What happened was a process called horizontal integration, where even if you have different businesses doing different things, because IoT, because interconnected networks are so seamless and powerful, you actually create this one seamless transition that generates a system where they all leverage the information across others. This is hard to explain except to show you about online shopping again. Online shopping, I won't mention the brands by name. They are only an app that does the retail side, right? They don't own a fleet of trucks or they do now maybe, but they don't make the products. What happened was, because they were able to generate an app and because they have a network system that makes it so seamless, that one shopping network seems to do everything. It has products, it has delivery methods, it has payment schemes, it has distributors, it has a front end website. When you see the product, you don't realize that they're only one part of the process. But because interconnected networks and Industry 4.0 allows this process of horizontal integration, it's so seamless in the process. Another example is food delivery. Many businesses, even small ones, didn't have a delivery service. But because new apps opened up that do food delivery, they have integrated themselves horizontally with the food to create this seamless experience as if you were ordering straight from them. And you don't realize, because of how well it's developed, meaning how well the UI, how well they program the system. But delivery apps, food apps, shopping, online shopping, all of those are great examples of horizontal integration. And this is just like a small snippet of what Industry 4.0 can do to an industry. And even then, you can see how profound it is. Many businesses who couldn't adapt to this failed. And many new businesses who adapted to it well are successful. It's all there. Now, the next one I want to mention is digitalization of products and services. So this one is a result of the process where many of the things we consume are now digital. Because we live in a digital environment, and a lot of the things we consume, a lot of the products and services we consume are also digital. This is a driving force, and it's only a natural response because, well, people are on the internet more. For example, entertainment, as now there's more digital forms of entertainment as opposed to traditional, like let's say plays or theaters or movies. Even before the pandemic, there was still a growing interest in online things. Sports, rather than attending a sporting event in person, more people attend it online, virtually. And these digitalization of the product is also what's pushing it. Because since the products and services are digital, it's only natural for them to adapt a digital platform. So it's just natural that they're integrated with Industry 4.0. And for many companies, before the pandemic, they may have tried to reject digitalization. For example, streaming services. They tried to reject the concept of streaming a video because they were like, oh, people would rather watch that in a movie house. But what happened was people began to see the convenience, the access, and the flexibility of viewing it whenever you wanted. And as those services become more and more digitalized, it's only natural that they merge with Industry 4.0. Okay, next one, consumer access. So this one for me is big on the driving force because consumers are getting smarter, or so we like to think. We're learning more about products. We're becoming more conscientious about what we consume. We're becoming more aware of practices. We're more concerned, like, let's say, if this is sourced organically, if it's safe to grow, is this, for example, like a green product. At the same time, consumers are also demanding more personalization. We want things that are catered to our needs. We want things that are catered to our lifestyle. I want a product that I can use when I use it. I don't want to be limited by operating hours. I don't want to be limited by, things that don't fit my lifestyle. It needs to be personalized. And even then, clothing, expression, the way you express yourself is more individualistic, especially with the rise of social media. And because of this, consumers are demanding more access in the flexibility of your products, are demanding more access in transparency, in information. And because consumers are demanding this kind of data, this information to make their choices on how they purchase, because it may be a cultural thing, because it's considered to be smarter, to be conscientious about how you purchase things. It may be a trend thing if you want to follow the latest products. But no matter what it is, consumers are evolving, and many businesses need to cater to that by accessing these digital forms. And so as consumers live in a digital environment, they naturally demand more digital products. And in that process, consumers change the way they want to access the ways they products. They want to have it on their phone. They want to have an app. They want to have it 24/7 ready. They want music on demand that they can stream whenever, 24/7. And all of those things drive these decisions to adapt these technologies. All right. Okay. All right. So uh, these are some of the examples of what really drives Industry 4.0. And it's important to see this because when you combine these drivers, right, and you see how effective and how much they're revolutionizing the way we experience things, you come to realize it's only natural that digitalization will happen. And uh, well, history has shown us that when you try to move against the way things develop, against technology, more often than not, if you can't adapt, you are left behind. Either as a business, you will fail, or maybe as a culture, you will not be able to respond. But um, these things are developing, these technologies, they are happening whether we like them or not. And as a business, if that's what you are, as a student, as a individual, as a human being, it's important to keep an eye on the drivers and be aware of how the culture of human experience is changing because of this digitalization. So it's important to see Industry 4.0 as principles, but also to keep an eye that the drivers are really dictating and pointing our way towards this form of digitalization. And again, as I mentioned before, since we're living in this revolution, it's an open-ended statement. There's no clear, definite end of what this will look like. There's no end picture of what the final result will be. It's continuously evolving. So I think since it's already like 5:45, I will kind of wrap up my presentation and summarize the second part with the principles that drive Industry 4.0 and the drivers that move Industry 4.0. They tell us a lot about how the system works. And if we keep an eye on those things, for example, for the principles, um, here, you can see why Industry 4.0 is so powerful and why it's so revolutionary. Interconnected networks, the transparency of data, the ability to decentralize information systems, and this ability for programs, robots, technology to assist human beings, it's clear that it will be very, very different. And we already can feel that from previous experiences. And secondly, is when we look at the drivers that are pushing us towards Industry 4.0, it's hard to say that it will stop. And it's hard to say that it won't continue to accelerate. Because when we see these drivers, we see the value and importance and what benefits they have on human lives. And so it's hard to, kind of picture it. So I hope that with this webinar that we've had a deeper, more profound appreciation for the thing that is Industry 4.0, that we've kind of opened our eyes slightly to how incredible it is living in this revolution and experiencing these changes for firsthand. And I also want us to see, if we're a business, if we're a student, if we're someone who's working, to see that adopting these principles in some way or form to our lifestyle, to our decisions, is important. Because as the Industry 4.0 continues to develop, flourish, and proliferate, we don't know how it will go. And we have seen that adopting the technology is important and it's very essential. So I hope with that, I will close. And I think I will just give a short teaser for what we have in the future. Okay, if that's all right, Pat. So I think we'll be discussing in the next couple of weeks also about smart cities and technology. It's something you might have heard of, and maybe in the Philippines it's not so common, but it's cool. Imagine all the technologies we've talked about, but in a city scale. We'll also talk about digital fabrication because it's one of the key things that we've talked about before, but digital fabrication actually plays a very big role on digitization. And you can imagine the name. And so if you're interested in these topics, please do stick around and keep an eye on HIFI. And I believe we have more webinars to come. And I think before I go, I also want to share our page. Yeah. So again, I'm part of Accelerating Makers, and our goal is that we want to talk about these innovations, these digital solutions. And so if you're ever interested in these technologies or want to see, hey, how do I see technology in action? Like what am I talking about? You can visit our page, Accelerating Makers, and we have some pretty cool videos. There's me, I have a couple of videos there, but there's also Jam and Tantan, Christian, who have some videos on packaging, sticker design, labeling, furniture. Christian even does some with the CNC machines. So if you'd like to learn more about these technologies, please do visit. They're pretty cool. And yeah, there. So bunch of videos if you'd like to see. Okay, and so with that, I'll close. All right.
And now we would like to invite you all to the open forum or Q&A. All right, we already have some questions already.
Yep, I think so.
So far we have 5. So the first one is, in time, how and where do you think technology should proceed? Which sectors do you think needs technology to be prioritized?
Okay, a general question, and I unfortunately will reply with a general statement. All sectors. The tough part is, or no, the cool part is because there's so many people, there's so many academicians and people inventing new things. It's worth considering that all sectors should benefit. Of course, that's an easy thing to say, but I think if I were to be specific, in the Philippines specifically, agriculture is one, but I would say technology is not the key issue of the Philippines. So, okay, straight answer. Agriculture definitely needs a boost in technology. It needs a boost in attention from the government, needs a boost in attention from people in general, but technology definitely benefit there. But I would say it's hard for me to say a specific one because they're very general. But agriculture definitely, especially here in the Philippines.
Okay, the second question is, what's our role in the bigger conversations on how technology governs and impacts society? Wow.
Okay. What's our role, like as individuals?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
It's tough because I guess you're like asking how does an individual affect an entire society? I would say we're in a revolution and we're in the midst of it. So it's like small, but for me, the way people interact with technology, the way they treat it is key. Meaning, what's the word? People who don't use technology properly, most notably for, okay, let's stay relevant, sure. Fake news, for example. It's very difficult to say because it's something that's developing now. And with the way technology is, it's out of control in some ways. And in a way, it really is out of our control. But what you can do as an individual is to stay active against it. To understand that there is power in this technology and to be aware that what we say and what we do has rules. And if part of that is educating other people in the influence of technology and how it can amplify one's opinions and how one can mislead or lead people using it, it's very key. So I would say it helps to be very idealistic with technology at times, because if we try to let go of these ideals and think that it's just technology, it's just Facebook, no one cares, it's a dangerous path to take, because we have seen the impact that taking technology lightly can do, especially in a social aspect. So yeah, I would say just
Yes.
don't take it lightly, especially things that you may think are just cultural fads may actually be intense cultural revolutions.
Very true. We have one from Sir Axel. Is Sophia the robot a product of the third or fourth industrial revolution?
Okay, let me quickly look up Sophia the robot because I'm not sure. Well, oh, okay. I think this is the scary looking one. Okay, first off, I'm not too familiar. I've only seen a picture, so I'm not exactly familiar with how she operates and how the function is. So I don't know, to be quite frank. I'm not familiar with Sophia. She's a robot. She could be related, but for me, if it's a robot that gathers data in how the way she answers, kind of like a person does, then yeah, she's definitely a product of the fourth. But if she functions on a specific limited set of rules and only sticks within that programming, then she's more of a third industrial revolution because she's just an individual computer. So that's usually how I separate it. When they access the internet, when they can access data in a network system, then I would say they're more fourth industrial revolution kind of thing. I think Axel also had a follow-up question.
Yes, he did. He said, in the Philippine setting, where are we right now in Industry 4.0? And if we are not there yet, how close or far are we to arrive at Industry 4.0? And if we are there, can you cite 1 to 2 examples?
So like many revolutions, especially ones you're living in, it doesn't happen all at once. We are living in the fourth industrial revolution in some industries. Notably, the ones I've mentioned, food delivery. That's definitely Industry 4.0 material. Online shopping, as I've described previously, definitely is. But again, Industry 4.0 isn't like a unified transformation process. There will be industries that lag behind, some that you might as well ignore, some that even in other countries has not yet fully tapped, like agriculture, although they have in some places. Yeah, one, two examples, food delivery, online shopping, huge examples of Industry 4.0. I know that there are some manufacturing companies that are trying to adopt these, like some plants in Laguna that are trying to adopt Industry 4.0 techniques. But I would say we are in it, but it's not like a all or nothing thing. Some industries are using it, some of them aren't. I mean, technically, some industries aren't even using 3.0 yet. So it's not like it's not just either you're in it or you're not. Some industries are, if that's all right.
Okay. Next question is from Clyde. Emphasizing the problem of climate change, do you think the general idea or system of Industry 4.0 is the solution for this? Since everything is shifting from physical to digital, do you think it is much healthier for the environment? The existing problem with digital means like radiation, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a question.
So I think, okay, Industry 4.0, when it relates to climate change, is important in one primary principle, transparency. We wouldn't know there was climate change, we wouldn't know there was pollution if we couldn't collect data. IoT systems have allowed us to collect more data and have allowed us to see just how bad the problem is. So, it was bad when they show you videos of like glaciers melting, sure. But when they show you like temperatures around the world, when they show you the air index on a global scale and to see like a cloud of smoke around China, then you really know how bad it is. So Industry 4.0, in a sense, is necessary to fully grasp and tackle the problem and understand the problem. But the shift from physical to digital, I don't think the focus should be on the shift itself, but more on the mindset. As we found out with climate problems, even if we're shifting to digital, but we don't actually care about solving the problem, then it will still be a problem. Delivery, for example, plastic waste, because we don't care about plastic waste, delivery services are creating a lot of it. And it's more of an afterthought. So I would say that it's not necessary that to say that shifting from physical to digital is a solution, but more to say that if we don't keep the mindset of trying to solve the problem, then even if we shift it to digital, the problem will still be there, right? It's not shifting from digital to physical to digital is not the solution, but it's the mindset that goes behind it. Because you can change from physical to digital, but if you don't care about the environment or your impact, it doesn't matter. You're still going to do unsustainable practices. So there. But I would say technological advancements are pretty good in that, it is technically, we make electricity, we're just using it more. We are making more electronic waste though, but so give and take. That's why it's more on the principle rather than the actual physical to digital. Sorry.
I agree. Agree. We have last two questions. So from Ms. Myla, are there initiatives from the government now, perhaps in the policy level, to support the national industrialization? Can be in agriculture, manufacturing, computer, infotech, etc.
Okay. I'm thinking like, how much will I get in trouble if I speak my mind? No, just kidding. So from what I know, and because we've dealt with a lot of government like DTI, there actually is a lot on a government level to support this kind of industrialization. There are incentives to adapt new technology. There are incentives for businesses to adapt green practices. There are incentives for innovation hubs where like MSMEs and startups are supposed to go to them to get like funding, to incubate their products, to overall develop it. But as you can imagine, the Philippines and the way the government runs, it's not perfect, to say the least. So while there are initiatives in some industries, and I definitely respect and love those movements, I guess as a whole, well, it is what it is. It's not perfect, to say the least. But there are definitely national level policies that are encouraging it. So Q-tip, if you want to start a business, try actually looking into government projects because you can get really good funding and they will really support you all the way to patenting. So there is a lot of support.
That's nice. Okay, our last question for today. Judging by the current progress of technology, which industries will flourish in the next decade?
Okay, hard question because that's like a predictive thing. I'm not a magic ball, so I can't tell you. But I would say, of course, context is important. The pandemic really, really ruined a lot and pushed a lot of new industries, whether by hook or by crook. And most of it wasn't by choice. We adopted to digital platforms. Work, education, online shopping, retail had to shift to digital. So I would say which will flourish in the next decade. Hard to say. I feel like entertainment might pick up. Um, manufacturing kind of there. I really don't know, and I feel like that's a good answer. It's not obvious because it's so mysterious. But I would say it really depends on context. I would never have said that online selling would be a thing, but because of the pandemic, it had to be. So hard to say what will flourish in the next decade. There's too much to guess. If that's all right. I'm sorry I can't answer that question.
Well, that is true. Okay, Bill, that concludes our Q&A. Thank you everyone who asked their questions and those who participated. We would like to ask for your feedback and comments about this afternoon's social innovation talk. We are sending the feedback link in the chat box right now. So you can scan that and let us know what you think about this week's social innovation talk. Now, we would also like to sit with you once again on November 10. You know what I did there? On November 10, as we talk about digital fabrication in Fab Labs. And lastly, on November 17, for emerging tech and smart cities. Again, we will be with Sir Gideon in these two events. You may register here at the link in the chat box. And if you have any or more questions, feel free to connect with us.
Is it alright to answer a question?
Go ahead, sir.
Oh, sorry, I read this one from Jaden Flores, and it's because it's kind of the second part of it was like I worry about traditional skills becoming obsolete. I would say don't worry. Again, the machines are smart, but they can't be smart if humans are dumb. They need, and also the thing is, what you should just worry about is, if anything, they're not pushing you to become obsolete, the machines. They're pushing you to become smarter. You have to get good. And traditional skills are important. And learning new skills like digital skills are just key. So I would say, I was in fine arts, we did painting. That's as traditional as it gets. But it still is important because if you have no creativity, then the machine's worthless, right? So the human is at the center. Don't make no mistake. They are not here to replace us. They're here to make our lives more advanced, but we also have to be more advanced. So you can do it. Don't lose. Sorry. Okay.
Sorry, I must have missed that question.
That's right. It was the second.
But thank you, sir.
Question.
Okay. So, for the last part, you can now scan the QR code shown right now, or visit our website at campsite.bio/Benilde HIFI to see our LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Medium blog platforms. The links to our next events will also be right there. Okay, well, thank you again, Sir Gideon, Accelerating Makers, and the HIFI team for making this social innovation talk possible. And of course, to everyone who joined us here today, thank you for being here. Once again, this has been Pat Cabansay, your host this afternoon. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon in our next two events. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Okay, see you guys. Bye.